The first thing you need to understand about Black Ridge Valley is that it doesn't forgive mistakes. The second thing is that Caleb Rourke made his mistake 3 years ago when he thought he could keep a dying ranch alive through sheer stubbornness. He was wrong. Not about the stubbornness. That part worked fine. It was everything else that failed. The drought that stretched across 2 summers. The cattle disease that took 40 head in a single week. The bank loan his father had signed before the cancer took him, leaving Caleb with land, debt, and a legacy that tasted like dust. The ranch sat at the eastern edge of the valley, where the scrubland met the foothills. 1,500 acres of hard country that required twice the work of good land and gave back half the yield. The main house was a low-slung structure of weathered wood and stone, built by Caleb's grandfather in 1889, when this valley still belonged to men willing to bleed for it. Now it belonged to men willing to wait. Caleb stood on the porch at 5:30 in the morning, coffee going cold in his hand, watching the horizon lighten from black to deep purple to that particular shade of gray that meant another day without rain. He was 34 years old and looked older. Lines around his eyes from squinting into sun and wind, hands scarred from wire and rope and all the small violences of ranch work, hair that had been dark brown before the worry started threading it with premature gray. He didn't look like much. That was intentional. Behind him, the screen door creaked open. Bootsteps crossed the porch. Heavy, uneven. That would be Marcus Webb, his foreman, and the only hand who'd stayed through the worst of it. "Coffee's burnt," Marcus said. "Made it 2 hours ago." That explains it. Marcus was 61, built like a tree stump, and possessed exactly zero patience for anything that wasted time, including conversation. He settled against the porch rail, producing a cigarette from his shirt pocket with the ease of long practice. "Saw something last night," Marcus said. "Thought you should know." Caleb waited. "Lights." Up near the north fence line, close to where the creek bends. 2 vehicles, maybe 3. Stayed for about an hour, then cleared out. Hunters? Wrong season. And they weren't moving around like hunters do. They were stationary, working. The coffee had gone from cold to undrinkable, but Caleb drank it anyway. "You get close enough to see what they were doing?" "Close enough to see equipment. Surveying gear, I'd guess. Tripods. Measuring chains. The kind of setup you bring when you're making a legal record of something." "On my land." "On your land." Caleb set the cup down on the porch rail with a soft click. For a long moment, he said nothing. Just watched the light spread across the valley, touching the tops of the distant mountains first, then sliding down into the gulches and draws. Beautiful country, if you didn't have to make a living from it. "How long until we move the cattle to the south pasture?" he asked. Marcus took a drag, exhaled slowly. 3 days, if we push it. Week, if we do it proper. Do it proper. I want every head accounted for. And I want someone riding fence every day. Different times, different routes. If we've got visitors, I want to know about it. You think it's hail?" It wasn't a question, but Caleb answered it anyway. "I don't think anything yet, but I'm going to find out." Marcus ground out his cigarette against the porch rail and flicked the butt into the dirt. "Man like Victor Hale doesn't send surveyors as a courtesy call, boss. He sends them when he's already decided what he's taking. Then he's going to be disappointed. You got a plan?" "I've got a question that needs answering first." Marcus waited. "If they were surveying," Caleb said slowly, "they were looking for something specific, boundary lines, water rights, mineral deposits, something valuable enough to justify the effort. And if Hale's behind it, he's not doing it blind. He's got information I don't have. So we find out what he knows." "No," Caleb said. "We find out how he knows it." The county recorder's office sat on the second floor of the courthouse in town, a squat brick building that had been built in 1902 and looked every year of it. The windows were tall and narrow, the kind that let in plenty of light but not much air. In summer, the place baked. In winter, the radiators clanked and hissed but never quite managed to heat the corners. Caleb arrived just after 9, when the morning rush of clerks and lawyers had thinned, but before lunch sent everyone scattering. The recorder himself was a thin man named Donald Pettigrew, who'd held the position for 23 years and wore his bureaucratic authority like a badge. "Mr. Rourke," Pettigrew said, not quite looking up from the ledger he was examining. "What brings you to town?" "Need to check some records." "Which records?" "Property surveys, water rights documentation. Anything filed in the last 6 months relating to my land. Now Pettigrew looked up. His eyes were pale blue behind wire-rimmed glasses, and they held the particular wariness of a man who recognized trouble when it walked through his door. That's fairly broad, he said carefully. Could you be more specific? No. The word hung in the air between them. Pettigrew closed his ledger. Mr. Rourke, you understand that while county records are public, there are procedures, request forms, processing times. I understand procedures just fine, Mr. Pettigrew. I also understand that when surveyors show up on private land after dark, somebody gave them a reason to be there, and that reason got filed in this office. I wouldn't know anything about surveyors. I'm not asking what you know. I'm asking to see what's on record. For a long moment, Pettigrew studied him. Then he stood, brushing invisible dust from his vest. Wait here. He disappeared into the back room where the filing cabinets lived in tall rows, organized by year and type, and a system that only Pettigrew fully understood. Caleb waited, hands in his pockets, studying the framed photographs on the walls. County officials from decades past, all stern men in dark suits who looked like they'd been assembled from the same basic template. When Pettigrew returned, he carried a thin folder. He set it on the counter between them, but kept his hand on top of it. There's been one filing, he said quietly, 3 weeks ago. A request to review water rights boundaries along Blackridge Creek, specifically the section that runs through your property and the adjacent parcels to the west. Who filed it? The request came from a law firm in the capital, Hendricks, Morse, and Talbot. Caleb knew the name. Everyone in the valley knew it. Hendricks, Morse, and Talbot didn't handle small cases or local disputes. They handled acquisitions, corporate restructuring, the kind of legal work that moved millions of dollars and changed ownership of entire counties. They were Victor Hale's lawyers. What was the result of the review? Caleb asked. Pettigrew lifted his hand from the folder. It's ongoing. They claimed a technical question about historical water rights dating back to the original land grants. Wanted to verify whether current usage matched legal entitlement. And nothing's been determined yet. The review's still open. Caleb pulled the folder toward him and opened it. Inside were copies of the original filing, dense legal language that boiled down to a simple question. Did Caleb Rourke have the legal right to the water he'd been using for decades, or had that right lapsed through some technicality buried in century-old paperwork? It was brilliant, in a cold way. You couldn't just take a man's land in 2024. There were laws, protests, public opinion, but you could take his water, slowly, legally, through a review process that could stretch for months while his cattle died of thirst and his credit dried up and his ranch slowly strangled. And by the time the review concluded, in Hale's favor, naturally, there'd be nothing left to fight over. I need copies of everything, Caleb said. That'll take time to... Today, Mr. Pettigrew. I'll wait. The older man's jaw tightened, but he nodded. I'll have them ready by 3. Appreciate it. Caleb left the folder on the counter and walked out. The morning sun had burned off the last of the coolness, and the street outside the courthouse shimmered with heat. He stood there for a moment, thinking. Then he walked 3 blocks east to a small office above the hardware store. The sign on the door read, Sarah Chen, Attorney at Law. Sarah had grown up in the valley, left for law school in the east, and come back 5 years ago with a degree and a chip on her shoulder about the way powerful men ran things. She handled wills, property disputes, and the occasional criminal defense. Her office was small but organized, dominated by a desk piled with case files and a bookshelf sagging under the weight of legal volumes. She looked up when Caleb entered, and her expression shifted from professional neutrality to something sharper. Caleb Rourke, she said, you're either here because you're in trouble or about to be. Second one. Have a seat. He sat. The chair was old leather, cracked but comfortable. Sarah leaned back in her own chair, fingers steepled, waiting. Caleb told her about the surveyors, the filing at the recorder's office, the water rights review. When he finished, Sarah was quiet for a long time. Hendricks, Morse, and Talbot, she finally said, that's Victor Hale's firm. I know. And you know what this means. I know what it looks like it means. I'm here to find out if I'm wrong. Sarah pulled a legal pad toward her and started making notes. The water rights question is tricky. Your family's been using that creek since your grandfather filed the original homestead claim, which gives you a strong historical argument. But if there's a technicality in the original grant, a boundary error, an expired rider, anything like that, Hale's lawyers will find it. Can they win? They can tie you up in court for a year, maybe 2. And while that's happening, you can't improve your water access, can't drill new wells, can't do anything that might prejudice the case. Meanwhile, your cattle still need water. So I lose slow instead of fast. That's the idea. Sarah set down her pen. Caleb, you need to understand what you're up against here. Victor Hale doesn't just own land in this valley. He owns the bank, the grain elevator, the feed supply company. He sits on the county planning commission. When he wants something, he doesn't fight for it. He just waits until it falls into his hands. He's going to be waiting a long time. Is he? Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. Because from where I'm sitting, you've got a struggling ranch, mounting debt, and now a legal challenge that's going to cost money you don't have. How long can you hold out? It was the question Caleb had been avoiding for 3 years. Long enough, he said. Sarah studied him. You're serious about this? I'm serious about not losing my land to a man who's never worked a day of it in his life. Then you need to be smart. This isn't a fight you can win by being stubborn. What kind of fight is it? The kind where you need to know exactly what legal ground you're standing on before the floor drops out. She pulled a file from her desk drawer. I'm going to need copies of every document you have relating to your property. Original land grants, water rights filings, boundary surveys, tax records, everything. And I mean everything, Caleb. If there's a scrap of paper in your grandfather's desk that mentions water or property lines, I need to see it. I'll bring them tomorrow. Bring them today. If Hale's already filed that review, he's 3 weeks ahead of us. We're playing catch-up. Caleb stood. What's this going to cost? More than you can afford, and less than you'll lose if we don't fight it. Sarah's smile was thin. We'll figure out payment later. Right now I want to see those documents. The sun was high and mean by the time Caleb got back to the ranch. Heat shimmered off the hood of his truck as he parked near the barn. Marcus was working on the tractor, hands black with grease, tools spread across a tarp. Find what you needed? Marcus called. Found more than I wanted. Caleb told him about the water rights filing. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression darkening. Hale, Marcus said when Caleb finished. It wasn't a question. Hale, what are you going to do? Lawyer says I need to dig up every document my grandfather ever filed. Deeds, surveys, water rights, the whole history. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag. Your grandfather kept records in the house, didn't he? Old filing cabinet in the back room? If they're still there. They're there. Old man Rourke never threw away paper if he could help it. Drove your grandmother crazy. The back room of the main house was small and dim, lit by a single window that looked out onto the yard. The filing cabinet stood in the corner, 4 drawers of dented green metal that had probably been old when Caleb's grandfather bought it. The top was covered in dust thick enough to write in. Caleb pulled open the first drawer. Inside, organized with the meticulous care of a man who understood that paper was power, were folders. Dozens of them. Land surveys from 1889, water rights filings from 1902, tax records stretching back to before statehood. His grandfather had kept everything, labeled in neat handwriting that had faded to brown but was still legible. Caleb pulled out the first folder and started reading. 3 hours later, he was surrounded by paper. It covered the desk, the floor, stacked in piles organized by date and type. His eyes burned from reading faded documents, and his head ached from trying to parse century-old legal language. But he'd found something. 2 things, actually. The first was a water rights filing from 1904, granting his grandfather access to Blackridge Creek in perpetuity, with specific language about volume and seasonal variation. The filing was signed by a territorial judge and countersigned by the land office. It was legal, binding, and explicit. The second was more interesting. In 1923, there had been a boundary dispute between Caleb's grandfather and a neighboring rancher named Matthias Hale. Matthias Hale, Victor Hale's grandfather. The dispute had been over a 2-mile section of fence line and access to a spring that fed into the creek. According to the records, Matthias Hale had claimed the spring was on his property. Caleb's grandfather had disagreed. The case went to arbitration, and the arbiter ruled in favor of Caleb's grandfather, establishing clear boundary lines and confirming that the spring and the water rights associated with it belonged to the Rourke family. Matthias Hale had lost, and apparently his grandson had a long memory. Caleb sat back in his chair, staring at the document. This wasn't just about water rights or land acquisition. This was personal, a grudge that had been waiting 90 years to be settled. The knowledge settled into his bones like cold. Victor Hale wasn't just trying to take his ranch. He was trying to finish what his grandfather had started. The phone rang just after sunset. Caleb was in the kitchen, heating up something that claimed to be beef stew, but tasted mostly like salt and regret. He picked up on the third ring. Rourke. Mr. Rourke, this is Donald Pettigrew, from the recorder's office. Caleb set down his spoon. Mr. Pettigrew. Your copies ready? They are. But that's not why I'm calling. Pettigrew's voice was lower now, almost hesitant. I thought you should know you weren't the only person asking about those filings today. Who else? I can't say, but they were well-dressed, professional. Asked a lot of specific questions about your property records, going back to the original grants. What did you tell them? I told them the same thing I tell everyone. Records are public, and they can file a request through proper channels. A pause. But, Mr. Rourke, they seemed to already know what they were looking for, like they'd seen the documents before. Caleb's grip tightened on the phone. When was this? About an hour after you left. Someone was watching him, tracking his movements, anticipating his next steps. Thank you for the call, Mr. Pettigrew. Mr. Rourke, be careful. I've seen this before. When powerful people start asking questions about your land, it usually means they've already decided it's theirs. The line went dead. Caleb stood in the kitchen, listening to the dial tone, thinking about surveyors in the dark and lawyers in the capital and a grudge that had survived 3 generations. Then he hung up the phone and went to find Marcus. The foreman was in the bunkhouse, playing cards with the 2 remaining hands. Tommy Reese, a kid of 22 who was still learning the difference between work and effort, and Dale Cross, a man in his 50s who drifted into the valley 6 months ago and never left. They looked up when Caleb entered. Need to talk, Caleb said. All of you. They gathered around the table, cards forgotten. In the yellow light of the bunkhouse, their faces looked tired and weathered, like the land itself. We've got a problem, Caleb said, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. He told them everything. The water rights challenge. Victor Hale. The history between their families. When he finished, the room was quiet except for the creak of the building settling. Tommy spoke first. So what do? We do our jobs, Caleb said, but we do them better than we've ever done them before. Every fence gets checked. Every head of cattle gets counted. Every drop of water gets accounted for. I want this ranch running so tight that if Hale's people come looking for a weakness, they won't find one. That's a lot of work for 3 men and a foreman, Dale said quietly. I know, but it's the work we've got. Marcus leaned back in his chair. You're asking us to hold a line we might not be able to hold. I'm asking you to help me fight for something worth keeping. And if we lose? Caleb met his eyes. Then we lose knowing we didn't quit. The silence stretched. Then Tommy nodded. Dale followed. Marcus was last, but when he nodded, it was with the finality of a man who'd made his choice and wouldn't revisit it. All right then, Marcus said. Guess we've got work to do? They stayed up late that night planning. Routes for fence checks, schedules for water monitoring, a rotation that would keep at least 1 man awake and watching at all times. It was paranoid and exhausting and probably impossible to maintain for more than a few weeks. But it was a start. When Caleb finally made it back to the main house, it was past midnight. The sky was clear and filled with stars. The kind of sky you only got in places far from cities and light pollution. Beautiful and indifferent. He stood on the porch for a long time, looking out at his land. 1,500 acres of hard country that had broken better men than him. Land that remembered every drop of blood and sweat that had gone into claiming it. Land that would outlast him, outlast Hale, outlast everyone who fought over it. But it was his land, his grandfather's land, and he'd be damned if he let it go without a fight. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called. Another answered. The sound carried across the valley, lonely and defiant. Caleb smiled. He knew exactly how they felt. The next morning started with trouble. Caleb was saddling his horse when Marcus came around the barn at a run, moving faster than a man his age should have been able to. "We've got visitors," Marcus said, breathing hard. "North fence line, 3 trucks. Look official." "How official?" "County logos on the doors." Caleb finished cinching the saddle and swung up. "Show me." They rode out together, taking the creek trail that ran along the property line. The sun was barely up, painting the valley in shades of amber and gray. Good light for seeing trouble coming. The trucks were parked where the fence met the road, 3 white vehicles with county seals on the doors, and men in khaki uniforms standing around with clipboards and surveying equipment. Official enough to have authority, casual enough to pretend this was routine. Caleb recognized the man in charge. Daniel Voss, the county water commissioner. Mid-50s, soft in the middle, with the smooth confidence of someone who'd spent his career in offices rather than fields. "Mr. Rourke," Voss said as Caleb dismounted. "Good morning." "Mr. Voss, what brings you out?" "Routine inspection. We're reviewing water usage in this section of the valley, making sure everything's in compliance with current regulations." "I wasn't notified. The notices were sent last week. Perhaps they got lost in the mail." Voss smiled blandly. "But since we're here, we might as well proceed. Unless you have some objection?" It was smoothly done. Refuse and look guilty. Comply and let them find whatever they'd been sent to find. "I'd like to see the authorization," Caleb said. Voss produced a document from his clipboard. Caleb read it carefully. It was legitimate, or at least looked legitimate. An order from the county commission to conduct inspections of water usage along Black Ridge Creek, signed by the commission chairman, who happened to be on Victor Hale's payroll. "Everything seems in order," Caleb said, handing it back. "But I'll be accompanying you. County property ends at the fence line. Past that, you're on my land, and I want a record of exactly what you're inspecting." Voss's smile tightened. "That won't be necessary." "I insist." For a moment their eyes met. Then Voss shrugged. "Suit yourself. We'll be taking water samples from the creek, measuring flow rates and documenting current usage. Routine work." "Then let's get to it." They spent the next 4 hours working their way along the creek. Voss's team was thorough, taking samples every 100 yards, measuring depth and flow with instruments that looked expensive and precise. They made notes, took photographs, and spoke in the careful jargon of people who knew their reports would be read by lawyers. Caleb watched it all, saying little, remembering everything. By noon they were done. Voss packed his equipment and headed for his truck, but not before turning back to Caleb. "You'll receive our report within 30 days, he said. "If there are any compliance issues, you'll be notified and given time to correct them. And if I can't correct them, then we'll discuss next steps." Voss climbed into his truck. "Have a good day, Mr. Rourke." The trucks drove away, leaving dust hanging in the air. Marcus rode up beside Caleb. That didn't feel routine. It wasn't. What were they really looking for? "Anything they can use to prove I'm using more water than I'm entitled to. Doesn't matter if it's true. They'll write the report to say what Hale wants it to say." "Can they do that?" "They just did." Caleb stared at the tracks the trucks had left in the dirt, thinking about water commissioners and lawyers and the slow machinery of legal theft. Then he pulled out his phone and called Sarah Chen. "We need to move faster," he said when she answered. "They're not waiting." "Neither are we," Sarah said. "I've been going through those documents you brought me. Caleb, I found something important." "What?" "Not over the phone. Can you come to town?" "On my way." He turned his horse and rode hard for the ranch house, Marcus struggling to keep up. Whatever Sarah had found, it was big enough to change her voice, big enough to matter. And in a fight like this, anything that mattered could be the difference between keeping his land and losing everything. The valley stretched out around him, hard and beautiful and unforgiving, just like the fight ahead. Sarah's office felt smaller than usual when Caleb arrived, like the walls had moved in while he wasn't looking. She was standing by the window, backlit by afternoon sun, holding a document that looked old enough to crumble. "Tell me about your great-grandfather," she said without preamble. Caleb closed the door behind him. "Never met him. He died in 1931. Why?" "Because he was either very smart or very lucky, and right now I'm betting on smart." Sarah turned, and her expression was the kind lawyers got when they found the crack in an opponent's case. "You know how I said I needed to see everything? Every scrap of paper?" "I remember." "You brought me copies. I need the originals." Why? She crossed to her desk and laid out the document she'd been holding. It was yellowed and fragile, covered in handwriting that had gone brown with age. This is a deed transfer from 1889, when your great-grandfather first claimed the land. I almost missed it because it was folded inside another document, a tax receipt from 1890. But look at this clause here. Caleb leaned in. The handwriting was spidery and hard to read, but he could make out enough. Water rights in perpetuity, including all tributaries, springs, and groundwater accessed via natural or man-made means, to extend to all heirs and assigns without limitation or review. So, he said, so that language is ironclad. It doesn't just grant water rights, it makes them permanent and unreviewable. Hale's lawyers are challenging your current usage, but they can't challenge the original grant, not if this document holds up. And if it doesn't? Sarah's excitement dimmed. That's why I need the original. A photocopy won't stand up in court if they claim it's been altered or forged. I need the actual document with the original signatures and seals. It's at the ranch, in that filing cabinet. Then we need to get it secured today. Because if Hale's people figure out this exists, they'll make it disappear. They'll try. Sarah started gathering papers, moving with the swift efficiency of someone who'd made a decision and wasn't reconsidering it. I'm coming with you. We'll photograph the original, make certified copies, and get it into a safety deposit box at the bank. Tonight. Bank closes at 5. Then we'd better hurry. The drive back to the ranch took 40 minutes, and Sarah spent most of it on her phone, making calls to a colleague in the capital who specialized in water rights law. Caleb half listened, his mind turning over the implications. If Sarah was right, if that document really was as strong as she claimed, then Hale's entire strategy collapsed. No amount of legal maneuvering could overcome an original deed with language that explicit. But that assumed the document survived long enough to matter. Marcus was waiting when they pulled up, leaning against the porch rail with the patient stillness of a man who'd been waiting a while. He straightened when he saw Sarah. Trouble? He asked. Maybe the opposite, Caleb said. We need that filing cabinet, everything in it. They hauled the cabinet into the kitchen and spread its contents across the table. 4 drawers worth of paperwork, organized by decade, each folder a piece of the ranch's history. Sarah went through them methodically, handling each document like it might dissolve under rough treatment. It took her 20 minutes to find it. The original deed was in a leather folder that had gone stiff with age, tucked between 2 mortgage documents from the 1920s. When Sarah opened it, the paper inside crackled softly. The ink had faded but was still legible. Signatures, seals, the careful legal language of territorial government. This is it, Sarah breathed. This is exactly what we need. She pulled out her phone and started photographing the document from multiple angles, making sure every word was captured. Then she made Caleb hold it while she took more photos, creating a record of him physically possessing the original. Why the photos of me? He asked. Chain of custody. If this ends up in court, we need to prove it came from you, from this ranch, from that cabinet. We need to establish provenance beyond any doubt. Marcus watched from the doorway. You really think Hale would try to steal it? I think Hale would do whatever it takes to win, Sarah said. And a document like this, in the wrong hands or the wrong fire, could disappear pretty easily. The words hung in the air. Caleb looked at the deed, this fragile piece of paper that suddenly held so much weight. His great-grandfather's signature was at the bottom, written in the confident hand of a man who'd believed in the permanence of the written word. A man who'd thought if you did things right and kept good records, the law would protect you. He'd been wrong, of course. The law protected people who could afford lawyers. But maybe, just maybe, this one time, it could protect the people who deserved protection. Let's get this to the bank, Caleb said. They made it to town with 15 minutes to spare. The bank was a stolid brick building on Main Street, built during the oil boom of the 1950s, when everyone thought Blackridge Valley was going to become something more than it ever actually did. Inside, it smelled like old carpet and recycled air. The manager was a woman named Patricia Moreno, mid-40s, with the practiced warmth of someone in the customer service industry and eyes that were considerably sharper than her smile suggested. She knew Caleb, knew everyone in the valley, really, and her expression shifted when she saw him walk in with Sarah Chen and an old leather folder. Mr. Rourke, she said. Miss Chen. How can I help you? Need to open a safety deposit box, Caleb said. Today. Patricia glanced at the clock. We're about to close. I know. This won't take long. Something in his voice must have registered because Patricia's professional warmth cooled into professional caution. Of course. Let me get the paperwork. The process took 10 minutes. Signature, identification, key assignment. Patricia led them into the vault, a windowless room lined with small metal doors, each one securing someone's important things. She inserted her key into box 247, waited for Caleb to insert his, and pulled out the long metal drawer. Take your time, she said, and left them alone. Sarah placed the deed inside the box with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. The leather folder lay there in the metal drawer, innocuous and vital all at once. That's it? Caleb asked. That's it. Now it's secured. Even if Hale somehow got a court order, which he won't because he doesn't know this exists, it would take weeks to access. Plenty of time for us to respond. They locked the box, handed back the keys, walked out into the late afternoon sun. Caleb should have felt relief. Instead, he felt exposed, like he'd just painted a target on his back and rung a bell. What happens now? He asked. Now we wait for Hale to make his next move, and we counter it with this. Sarah patted her briefcase where she'd stored the photographs. But Caleb, you need to understand, this document gives us leverage, but it doesn't end the fight. Hale can still make your life difficult. He can still tie you up in court, still pressure your suppliers, still make it expensive and exhausting to hold on to what's yours. But we can win. We can survive, which, in a fight like this, is the same thing. They were walking toward their vehicles when a black SUV pulled up across the street. Expensive, new, with tinted windows and the kind of shine that suggested someone washed it daily. The driver's door opened and a man got out. He was tall, maybe 6'2", wearing a suit that probably cost more than Caleb made in a month. Hair going gray at the temples in that way that made some men look distinguished. Face that was handsome in a cold, assembled way, like someone had built him from a catalog of successful features. Victor Hale. Caleb had seen him before, of course. At county meetings, sometimes at the feed store or the diner, moving through town with the casual authority of someone who owned most of it. But they'd never spoken directly, never had reason to. Until now. Hale crossed the street with the unhurried confidence of a man who knew people would wait. He stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets, and smiled. Caleb Rourke, he said, I was hoping I'd run into you. Mr. Hale, please, call me Victor. The smile didn't waver. I understand you've been having some concerns about water rights. I've been having concerns about surveyors on my property and county commissioners inspecting my creek. All routine, I assure you. County business. Is that what you call it? Hale's smile shifted slightly, like he was enjoying this. You know, your grandfather and mine had a disagreement once, long time ago, over a fence line, if I recall correctly. A spring, Caleb said. Your grandfather tried to claim water rights that weren't his. Ah, that's right, the spring. Hale nodded slowly. My grandfather lost that fight. Bitter pill for him. Spent years talking about it, actually. How the arbiter got it wrong, how the Rourkes had manipulated the process. The arbiter followed the law. Perhaps. Or perhaps he followed the louder voice. Hale's eyes were gray, cold as January. Point is, my grandfather never forgot. And neither did I. Funny thing about grudges, they compound over time like interest. 3 generations worth in this case. Sarah stepped forward. Mr. Hale, if you're admitting to using county resources for personal vendettas... I'm not admitting anything, Ms. Chen. I'm simply sharing family history. He turned his attention back to Caleb. I'm going to be direct with you, Rourke. Your ranch is failing. Everyone knows it. The drought, the debt, the losses. You're barely hanging on. And now there's this water rights question. All very unfortunate. Get to the point. The point is, I'm prepared to make you an offer. A generous one. I'll buy your land at fair market value, actually above market value, considering its current state. You walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else, somewhere easier. No. The word dropped like a stone. Hale's smile faded. You might want to think about it. I just did. Answer's no. Caleb, Hale said, and now his voice had lost its veneer of friendliness. I'm trying to help you here. I don't have to make this offer. I could just wait for the inevitable. Watch your ranch collapse under its own weight. Buy the land from the bank when they foreclose. But I'm offering you a way out with your dignity intact. My dignity's fine right where it is. Is it? Hale stepped closer. Because from where I stand, you're a man clinging to a sinking ship, too stubborn to grab the life raft, and when you finally go under, and you will, you'll have nothing. No land, no money, no future. Just the memory of pride that cost you everything. Caleb held his gaze. You done? For a long moment, Hale said nothing. Then he straightened his cuffs, and the cold smile returned. I'll give you a week to reconsider, he said. After that, the offer expires, and we do this the hard way. He walked back to his SUV, got in, and drove away. Sarah let out a breath she'd been holding. Well, that was direct. He's scared, Caleb said. He just threatened you. He offered to buy me out. That's different. Caleb watched the SUV disappear around a corner. If he was really confident in his legal position, he wouldn't be making offers. He'd just take what he wanted. Maybe. Or maybe he's trying to avoid a fight that could go public. Bad press for a man like Hale. Marcus had been silent through the whole exchange, but now he spoke up. Boss, that man just declared war. No, Caleb said. He's been at war for weeks. He just finally admitted it. They drove back to the ranch in the gathering dusk. The sky had gone purple and gold, and the first stars were showing themselves. Beautiful evening, the kind that made you forget how hard this country could be. But Caleb wasn't forgetting. That night, he sat on the porch with a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving for a special occasion. This didn't feel special, but it felt like the kind of night that required whiskey nonetheless. Marcus joined him after an hour, accepting the bottle when Caleb passed it. You think he'll really come at us hard? Marcus asked. He already is. What we saw today was him being polite. Christ. Marcus took a drink. What's our move? Same as before. Hold the line, keep the ranch running. Don't give him anything to use against us. And if that's not enough? Caleb took the bottle back. Then we get creative. Creative how? Still working on that part. They sat in silence for a while, passing the bottle back and forth. Somewhere out in the darkness, cattle lowed softly to each other. The creek murmured over stones. Ordinary ranch sounds, but tonight they felt fragile, like they could disappear at any moment. Your grandfather would have handled this different, Marcus said eventually. Yeah? He'd have gone into town, found Hale in a bar somewhere, and beat the hell out of him. Simple. Direct. Different times. Maybe. Marcus stood, joints creaking. But there's something to be said for simple solutions. There's something to be said for not going to jail, too. Marcus laughed, short and sharp. Fair point. Night, boss. Night. Caleb stayed on the porch until the bottle was empty and the stars had wheeled overhead into new positions. Thinking about his great-grandfather who'd claimed this land when it was still wild. His grandfather who'd defended it against men like Matthias Hale. His father who'd held it together through droughts and downturns until cancer took him too young. 3 generations of Rourkes all fighting to keep this hard country. And now it was his turn. He went to bed sometime after midnight, but sleep didn't come easy. He kept seeing Hale's cold smile, hearing that voice telling him to walk away with dignity. Like dignity was something you could take with you instead of something you had to stand for. The next morning brought rain. Not much, just enough to darken the dust and make the air smell like wet earth. First real rain in 6 weeks. Under normal circumstances, it would have been cause for celebration. These weren't normal circumstances. Caleb was checking the rain gauge by the barn when he heard the truck coming up the drive. He recognized the engine before he saw it. Dale's old Ford, running rough like it always did. But Dale should have been out checking the south fence line, not coming back to the house. The truck stopped hard, spraying gravel. Dale got out fast, moving with the urgency of a man bringing bad news. Got a problem, he called. South fence! Someone cut it! Caleb felt something cold settle in his stomach. How much? Quarter mile, maybe more. Clean cuts, professional work. They took out whole sections. Cattle? Can't tell yet. But if they wandered through before I found it... Dale didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Cattle on the road meant liability. Cattle on someone else's property meant trespassing claims. Either way, It meant trouble. "Get Marcus and Tommy," Caleb said. "We ride out now." The fence line ran along the southern boundary of the property, separating Caleb's land from a stretch of county road, and beyond that, undeveloped rangeland that Hale had bought 3 years ago. The fence was old but maintained, barbed wire strung between posts that Caleb's grandfather had set in concrete. Now it lay on the ground in neat sections, cut with wire snips or bolt cutters. Marcus rode along the damage, counting. 7 sections, all cut at the posts. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Professionals, Caleb said, or ranchers. Same thing in this valley. They found the first steer about 100 yards down the road, grazing contentedly on the county easement. Then another, then 5 more, scattered across land that wasn't theirs. Tommy brought them back, hazing them through the gap in the fence while Caleb and Marcus worked to string temporary wire. It was hot, tedious work, made worse by knowing it was all reaction, fixing damage someone else had caused on purpose. "Could have been kids," Dale offered. "Vandalism." "Could have been," Marcus said. "But it wasn't." "How do you know?" "Because kids would have cut random sections. This was systematic. Every 7th post, like someone measured it. That's planning. They got the fence back up by noon, but it was a patch job at best. Proper repairs would take days and materials Caleb couldn't afford right now. But it would hold for the moment, which was all that mattered. Back at the ranch, Caleb called the sheriff's office, talked to a deputy named Wilson who sounded bored and skeptical in equal measure. Yes, he'd send someone out to take a report. No, he couldn't say when. These things happened on ranches sometimes, probably kids. Caleb hung up knowing nothing would come of it. That evening, Sarah called. "I heard about your fence," she said. News traveled fast in a small valley. "Yeah, someone cut it last night." "You think it was Hale?" "I think Hale told me we'd be doing this the hard way if I didn't accept his offer. This feels pretty hard." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Caleb, I need to tell you something. This afternoon I got a call from a colleague in the Capitol. Someone's been asking questions about me, specifically about my client list and my financial situation." "Who?" "Wouldn't say, but the questions were pointed. How much business do I really have? Can I afford to take on expensive cases? Do I have any conflicts of interest with local landowners?" Caleb's grip tightened on the phone. "They're trying to pressure you, or figure out if I'm vulnerable to pressure." Sarah sighed. "I've been doing this long enough to know what it means when the other side starts investigating your lawyer. It means they're preparing a full court press, character attacks, financial pressure, maybe even bar complaints if they can manufacture something. You don't have to stay on this case." "The hell I don't." Her voice was sharp. "You think I'm backing down because some lawyer in a fancy suit asks around about me?" "I grew up in this valley, Caleb. I know exactly what men like Hale do to people, and I'm not giving him the satisfaction." Despite everything, Caleb smiled. "Appreciate that. Just be ready. This is going to get uglier before it gets better. Hale's not just coming after your land anymore. He's coming after everything. Your reputation, your credit, your support system. He's going to try to isolate you, make you feel like fighting back is pointless." "What do I do?" "You don't fight alone. You build alliances. Find people who'll stand with you when things get bad." After they hung up, Caleb sat at the kitchen table thinking about alliances. About who in this valley would stand with a failing rancher against the most powerful man in 3 counties. The list was short, but maybe short was enough. 2 days later, he got a call from his feed supplier. The conversation was brief and apologetic. Due to changes in credit policy, they could no longer extend terms to the ranch. Cash only, going forward. The next day, the grain elevator called with a similar message. The day after that, his insurance broker left a voicemail about premium increases. It was coordinated and effective. Every business Caleb relied on was suddenly making his life more expensive, more difficult, more tenuous. Hale wasn't attacking directly. He was turning off the lights one by one, waiting for Caleb to stumble in the dark. Marcus found him in the barn that evening, staring at a stack of feed bills. "How bad?" Marcus asked. "Bad enough." Caleb set down the papers. "We've got maybe 6 weeks of operating cash. After that, I'll need to either sell cattle early, at a loss, or start missing payments." "What about the bank?" "Already extended once. They won't do it again, not with Hale in their ear." Marcus pulled up a bucket and sat. "So what's the play?" "I don't know yet." Caleb rubbed his face. Every move I make, he's already 3 steps ahead. It's like fighting smoke. Then stop fighting smoke. Fight the man. How? Find what he cares about and threaten it. Caleb looked at his foreman. You suggesting I threaten Victor Hale? I'm suggesting you figure out what scares him the same way he figured out what scares you. Rich men like Hale, they're not afraid of losing money. They've got too much. But reputation, public image, that's different. That's vulnerable. It was a good point. Hale had built his empire on being seen as a legitimate businessman, a pillar of the community. If that image cracked, if people started seeing him as a bully instead of a benefactor. I need information, Caleb said, about Hale's business dealings, his other acquisitions, pattern of behavior. Where are you going to get that? I know someone who might help. The next morning, Caleb drove 2 hours north to a town called Redemption Creek. It was bigger than Blackridge, with actual traffic lights and a Walmart, but it had the same dusty, struggling feel of a place the modern world had mostly passed by. The person he was looking for lived in a small house on the edge of town, surrounded by a chain-link fence, and 3 dogs who barked when Caleb pulled up. The man who came to the door was in his 70s, rail-thin, with eyes that had seen too much and a handshake that still had strength in it. Caleb Rourke, he said. Been a long time. Mr. Patterson, thanks for seeing me. Come in. Dogs won't bite unless I tell them to. Robert Patterson had been a county clerk 30 years ago, back when Caleb's father was alive. He'd retired under circumstances that were politely called irregular, but which everyone knew meant he'd refused to process a land deal that would have benefited the wrong people. Cost him his job, but he'd kept his integrity. Inside, the house was cluttered but clean, papers everywhere, filing cabinets lining the walls. Still keeping records? Caleb asked. Old habits. Patterson poured coffee without asking if Caleb wanted any. You said on the phone you needed information about Victor Hale. Whatever you've got. Patterson disappeared into a back room and returned with a thick folder. I've been watching that man for 20 years, ever since he started buying up land in the valley. At first I thought he was just another businessman. But then I started seeing patterns. He spread documents across the kitchen table. Land deeds, court filings, county records. Hale's acquired 17 properties in the last 2 decades, Patterson said. Every single one followed the same playbook. Financial pressure on the owner, legal challenges, mysterious problems with permits or water rights, and then, when the owner was desperate enough, a buyout offer. All legal? Technically, but legal and ethical aren't the same thing. Patterson tapped one document. This was the Morrison Ranch. Hale wanted it because it sat on an aquifer. Started having problems with his well permits. County kept delaying approvals. Morrison couldn't water his crops. Lost 2 seasons, went bankrupt. Hale bought it for pennies on the dollar. He pulled out another file. This was the Chen property, no relation to your lawyer. Family farm, 3 generations. Hale wanted the mineral rights. Suddenly they're getting cited for zoning violations that didn't exist 6 months earlier. Code enforcement every week. Eventually they gave up and sold. Document after document, each one telling the same story. Pressure, persistence, acquisition. He's done this before, Caleb said quietly. 17 times, and he's never lost. Patterson leaned back. But here's the thing. Each time he was careful, stayed just on the right side of legal, never left evidence of coordination between his business interests and the county officials who made life difficult for his targets. That's what makes him dangerous. He's patient, and he's thorough. So how do I beat him? You don't beat him at his own game. The system's rigged in favor of men like Hale. You beat him by changing the game. How? Patterson smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. You make it public. You show people the pattern. One case of a rancher having water rights problems might be bad luck. 17 cases? That's conspiracy. That's the kind of thing newspapers care about. Caleb thought about that. You'd go on record? Son, I've been waiting 20 years for someone to ask. I've got every document, every filing, every piece of evidence showing Hale's pattern. And I'll testify to all of it if it means finally stopping that bastard. They spent the next 3 hours going through files. By the time Caleb left, his truck was loaded with boxes of documents, and his head was spinning with possibilities. The drive back to Blackridge gave him time to think. Hale had made a mistake. He'd assumed Caleb would fight like the others had, isolated, reactive, eventually overwhelmed. But Caleb wasn't alone. He had Sarah. He had Patterson's evidence. He had that original deed in a safety deposit box. And maybe, just maybe, he had something else. A way to turn the whole valley against Victor Hale. The sun was setting when he got back to the ranch. Marcus was waiting on the porch, and from his expression, something had happened. "What now?" Caleb asked. "County inspector came by. Said there's been a complaint about our cattle operation, environmental concerns. They're opening an investigation." "Of course they are." Caleb got out of the truck. "Did he say who filed the complaint?" "Anonymous tip." Marcus spat into the dirt. "Funny how many anonymous tips we're getting lately." Caleb looked at the boxes in his truck bed, then at the ranch spread out around him. His land, his responsibility, his fight. "Get Tommy and Dale," he said. "We're having a meeting tonight, all of us, because it's time we stopped playing defense." "What are you thinking?" Caleb smiled, and it felt good to smile about something. "I'm thinking it's time Victor Hale learned that you can't break what refuses to bend." The meeting that night happened in the barn, under lights that swung gently in the draft and threw shadows across the walls. Marcus, Tommy, and Dale sat on hay bales while Caleb stood near the workbench, boxes from Patterson's house stacked behind him like evidence at a trial. "Here's what we know," Caleb said, and his voice carried in the quiet space. "Victor Hale has done this 17 times before. Different ranches, different people, same pattern. He applies pressure through official channels, county inspectors, water commissioners, zoning boards. He makes problems appear where none existed. And when the target is desperate enough, he swoops in with a buyout offer." "So we're number 18, Dale said. "We would be, except we know what he's doing now, and we've got proof." Caleb pulled out Patterson's files and spread them across the workbench. Land deeds, inspection reports, court documents. A paper trail that showed Hale's acquisitions going back 20 years. "This is Morrison's ranch," he said, tapping one file. "Hale wanted the water rights. Morrison suddenly couldn't get permits, lost everything within 18 months. This is the Chen farm. Same story, different excuse. And here's the interesting part. In every case, the county official who created the problems either worked for Hale within 2 years or received donations to their re-election campaigns." Marcus leaned forward, studying the documents. "You're saying Hale bought them. I'm saying there's a pattern, one that a good reporter could make a hell of a story out of." "You want to go to the press," Tommy said. He sounded uncertain, like this was bigger than he'd signed up for. "I want to change the conversation. Right now, Hale's fighting us in the dark. Nobody knows what he's doing except us and him. But if this becomes public, if people in the valley start seeing how he's operated for 2 decades, it stops being about one failing ranch. It becomes about whether we're going to let someone buy up the whole valley using dirty tactics." Dale lit a cigarette, smoke curling up toward the barn's rafters. "Papers around here won't touch this. Hale advertises with them. Probably owns stock in some of them." "I'm not talking about local papers." Caleb pulled out another document, a business card he'd taken from Patterson's kitchen. "There's a reporter in the Capitol, works for the Tribune. She's done investigations into rural land grabs before. Patterson says she's good and she's not afraid of powerful people." "You trust Patterson?" Marcus asked. "I trust that he's been waiting 20 years to see Hale get what's coming to him. That's motivation enough." Marcus stood and walked over to the documents, picking through them with rough hands that knew cattle better than paper. After a moment, he looked up. "This could backfire. Hale's got money for lawyers. Good ones. They'll come after you for defamation, maybe after this reporter too. Could make things worse." "Could," Caleb agreed. "But right now we're losing slow. I'd rather take a risk and maybe win than just wait for the inevitable." The barn was quiet except for the sounds of horses shifting in their stalls and the wind testing the gaps in the walls. Tommy picked at a splinter on the hay bale, not meeting anyone's eyes. Dale smoked. Marcus studied the documents like they were a hand of cards he was trying to read. Finally, Marcus spoke. "You do this. There's no going back. Hale will know you're not rolling over. He'll escalate. He's already escalating. Cut fences, credit pressure, county investigations. What's left? He's already doing everything except burning the place down." "Don't give him ideas," Dale muttered. "I'm not scared of fire," Caleb said. "I'm scared of losing this place without ever really fighting for it. My great-grandfather claimed this land. My grandfather defended it. My father kept it alive. And I'll be damned if I'm the Rourke who just handed it over because the fight got hard." Tommy finally looked up. What do you need from us? I need you to keep this ranch running while I deal with the rest. I need you to be ready for more problems, more inspections, more vandalism, and I need you to be okay with the fact that this might get uglier before it gets better. We're already here, Tommy said. Might as well see it through. Dale nodded. Marcus crossed his arms, his face unreadable in the shifting light. All right then, Marcus said. Let's go to war. The next morning, Caleb called the number on the card Patterson had given him. A woman answered on the third ring, voice sharp and professional. Jennifer Ortiz. Mr. Ortiz, my name is Caleb Rourke. I'm calling from Black Ridge Valley. Robert Patterson gave me your number. There was a pause. Patterson. Haven't heard from him in a while. How's he doing? Still keeping records, still carrying grudges. He said you might be interested in a story about land acquisition practices in rural counties. I'm listening. Caleb spent the next 20 minutes laying it out. Hale's pattern of acquisitions, the 17 properties, the coordination between his business interests and county officials, his own current situation as number 18. When he finished, Ortiz was quiet for a moment. You have documentation? Files going back 20 years, property records, inspection reports, court filings. Patterson kept copies of everything. And you're willing to go on record? I'm willing to do whatever it takes to stop this from happening again. Another pause. Caleb could hear her typing, the soft click of keys in the background. Mr. Rourke, I need to be straight with you. A story like this, if it's as solid as you say, could be significant, but it'll also make you a target. People don't like whistleblowers, even when they're right. Your neighbors might see you as a troublemaker. Hale will definitely retaliate. Are you prepared for that? I'm already a target. At least this way other people will know why. All right? I'll drive down this week. Bring everything you have. I'll need to verify the documents, interview Patterson, probably talk to some of the other people Hale pushed out if they're willing. This isn't a quick process. How long? A real investigation? 4 to 6 weeks minimum, maybe longer if Hale's lawyers start throwing up roadblocks. 4 to 6 weeks. Caleb did the math in his head. His operating cash would run out before then. The county's environmental investigation would probably conclude. Hale could make a dozen more moves while they waited for a story to publish. But what choice did he have? I'll have everything ready when you get here, he said. After hanging up, Caleb sat at the kitchen table and stared at nothing for a while. The house was quiet around him, full of the small sounds of an old building, the tick of settling wood, the hum of the refrigerator, the wind finding its way through cracks. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Need to talk. Call when you can. He dialed her number. I got served this morning, Sarah said without preamble. Bar complaint. Anonymous. Claims I'm advising you to engage in fraudulent claims against a respected businessman. Caleb's hand tightened on the phone. Can they do that? They can file anything. Whether it goes anywhere is a different question, but it'll tie me up in hearings and responses for weeks, which is exactly the point. Her voice was tight with controlled anger. They're trying to separate you from your lawyer right when you need one most. What do we do? I fight it. File a response, show it's frivolous, probably get it dismissed eventually. But Caleb, in the meantime, I'm going to be distracted, and I can't be in 2 places at once. You think I should get another lawyer? I think you should be prepared for the possibility that I might not be available when you need me. That complaint, it's designed to slow me down, make me defensive. Classic intimidation tactic. Caleb looked out the window at his land, at the barn and the corrals and the distant fence lines. I called a reporter this morning from the Tribune. She's coming down to investigate Hale's land acquisitions. Sarah was quiet for a moment. That's bold. That's desperate. Maybe, but it might work. If the story's strong enough, it could create public pressure. Make it harder for Hale to operate in the shadows. She paused. Just be ready. Once that reporter starts asking questions, Hale will know exactly what you're doing, and he won't like it. He doesn't like me much already. There's a difference between not liking you and seeing you as a genuine threat. Right now, you're an annoyance. You become a threat. The gloves come off. After they hung up, Caleb walked out to the porch. It was mid-morning, the sun already beating down hard enough to make the air shimmer. Marcus was working with one of the horses in the corral, patient and methodical, the way he did everything. Caleb watched him for a while, thinking about threats and gloves and how much harder this was going to get. Then he went back inside and started organizing Patterson's documents for Ortiz's arrival. The county environmental inspector showed up 2 days later. His name was Richard Moss, and he had the soft hands and careful demeanor of someone who spent most of his time in offices rather than fields. He arrived with a clipboard and a camera and an apologetic expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mr. Rourke," he said, "I'm here about the complaint filed regarding your cattle operation." "What complaint specifically?" Moss consulted his clipboard. "Concerns about waste management and potential contamination of groundwater. I'll need to inspect your facilities and take some samples." "You have a warrant?" "I don't need a warrant for a county inspection, Mr. Rourke. This is standard procedure." It wasn't, but arguing would only make it look like Caleb had something to hide. So he nodded and followed Moss around the property, watching as the inspector photographed the cattle pens, the manure collection area, the drainage systems that Caleb's grandfather had installed 40 years ago. Moss took water samples from the creek, from the well, from 3 different points around the property. He made notes, measured distances, asked questions in a tone that was polite and completely neutral. After 2 hours, he packed up his equipment. "How long until you file your report?" Caleb asked. "Standard turnaround is 30 days. You'll receive a copy of my findings, and if there are any compliance issues, you'll have 60 days to address them." "And if there aren't any issues?" Moss's expression didn't change. "Then you'll receive a letter saying the investigation is closed." He drove away, leaving tire tracks in the gravel and a cold certainty in Caleb's gut that the report would find problems whether they existed or not. That evening, Marcus found Caleb in the barn, replacing a broken board in one of the stalls. "Inspection looked thorough," Marcus said. "Too thorough. He was looking for something specific." "Find anything?" "Not that I could tell, but he took enough samples to test for whatever he wants to test for." Marcus picked up a hammer and started pulling nails from the damaged board. They worked in silence for a while, the familiar rhythm of ranch work creating a space where conversation happened easier. "You ever think about just walking away?" Marcus asked eventually. Caleb looked at him. "I'm serious," Marcus continued. "Take Hale's offer. Get out while you still can. Start over somewhere else. Somewhere easier." "You think I should quit?" "I think you're fighting a fight you might not win. And I think there's no shame in knowing when you're beat." Caleb set down his hammer. "My great-grandfather walked 300 miles to claim this land. Walked. Through country that was barely mapped. He filed his claim, built that house out there with his own hands, and spent 40 years proving he could make it work. My grandfather fought the Hales once before and won. My father kept this place alive through droughts and depressions and every other kind of hardship. And you think I should be the one who walks away? I think your great-grandfather didn't have Victor Hale breathing down his neck. Times change. Some things don't, like the fact that this is my land, mine. Not Hale's, not the bank's, mine. And I don't care how hard he makes it. I'm not giving it up." Marcus studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded, picked up his hammer, and went back to work. They finished the repairs just as the sun was setting. The sky had gone orange and purple, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. Storm coming, maybe. The valley could use it. Jennifer Ortiz arrived on a Thursday morning, driving a practical sedan that was already dusty from the county roads. She was younger than Caleb had expected, mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that took in everything with the quick assessment of someone trained to notice details. Patterson was with her. "Figured I should be here for this," the old man said as he got out of the car, "in case you need someone to verify the documents." They spent the day in Caleb's kitchen, documents spread across the table like pieces of a puzzle. Ortiz went through everything methodically, taking notes, asking questions, cross-referencing dates and names. "This is solid," she said after several hours. "The pattern is clear. Hale identifies properties he wants, then county officials create problems for the current owners, problems that mysteriously disappear once Hale acquires the land." "Can you prove the connection?" Caleb asked. "Prove in a legal sense? Probably not without someone flipping and admitting coordination. But prove in a journalistic sense. Show the pattern clearly enough that readers can draw their own conclusions? Absolutely." She tapped one document. "The Morrison case is particularly damning. The county denied his well permits for 18 months, citing aquifer concerns. 3 months after Hale bought the property, the concerns disappeared and permits were approved. So what's next? I need to interview the other people Hale pushed out, get their stories on record. Then I'll try to get comments from the county officials involved and from Hale himself, which is when this gets interesting. Patterson leaned back in his chair. Hale won't comment. His lawyers will tell him to stay quiet. Probably, Ortiz agreed, but I have to give him the opportunity. Journalistic ethics. And sometimes people surprise you. Sometimes they say more than they should when confronted with evidence. When will you publish? Caleb asked. 4 weeks minimum, maybe 5. I need to lock down every fact, every quote, every connection. A story like this, taking on someone as powerful as Hale, has to be airtight. One mistake and his lawyers will shred it. 4 weeks, maybe 5. Caleb did the math again. His cash reserves wouldn't last that long. The county investigation would conclude. Hale would have plenty of time to make more moves. But this was the play they had, so it would have to be enough. Ortiz left late that afternoon, her car loaded with copied documents and a promise to stay in touch. Patterson stayed behind, sharing a drink with Caleb on the porch as the sun went down. You think she can pull it off? Caleb asked. I think she's good at what she does. And I think the story's strong enough to cause Hale real problems. Patterson swirled his whiskey. But Caleb, you need to understand, even if this works, even if the story runs and creates a scandal, it doesn't automatically save your ranch. It might stop Hale, might make him back off, but your financial problems don't disappear just because he's exposed. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're putting a lot of hope in a newspaper story. I'm putting hope in the truth, and in people being decent enough to care when they see what's really happening. Patterson smiled sadly. You've got more faith in people than I do. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars come out. Somewhere out on the range, a coyote called. The sound carried across the valley, wild and lonely. Your grandfather was like you, Patterson said eventually. Stubborn as hell, believed in doing things right even when it cost him. That's why I helped him back when he fought Matthias Hale. And that's why I'm helping you now. Did he ever doubt? My grandfather? Every damn day, probably. But he didn't quit. That was the thing about the Rourkes. You might doubt, but you don't quit. The next week crawled by like something wounded. Every day brought new small disasters. A pump failed. 3 steers got through a weak section of fence and spent half a day on the highway before Tommy managed to round them up. The feed supplier called again to say their prices were going up, effective immediately. Caleb handled each problem as it came, patching and fixing and stretching his resources thinner. At night, he went over the books, trying to find money that wasn't there, cutting expenses that were already cut to the bone. Sarah called with updates on her bar complaint. The hearing had been scheduled. She was preparing her defense, but it was taking time she should have been spending on his case. How are you holding up? She asked during one call. Still standing. That's not what I asked. Caleb looked around his kitchen, at the stack of bills on the counter, at the calendar on the wall where he'd been marking off days. I'm tired, but I'm not done. Good, because I heard something today. Hale's been meeting with county commissioners, closed-door sessions. No one knows what they're discussing, but given the timing, he's making another move. That'd be my guess. Be ready. The move came 3 days later, delivered by certified mail. A notice from the County Planning Commission. Due to concerns about land use and environmental impact, the commission was reviewing agricultural zoning in certain sections of the valley, including Caleb's ranch. The review would determine whether current usage was appropriate or whether zoning should be changed to restrict agricultural activity. It was brilliant and devastating. If the commission changed the zoning, Caleb wouldn't be able to run cattle on his own land. The ranch would become effectively worthless overnight. Marcus read the notice and swore. They can't do this. They can. It's their jurisdiction. How long do we have? Hearings in 3 weeks. We can present evidence, make arguments, but the commission makes the final decision. And the commission's in Hale's pocket. Some of them, yeah. Caleb set down the notice and walked outside. The day was hot and still, the kind of weather that pressed down on you like a hand. He walked to the fence line and stood there, looking out at his land. 1,500 acres of hard country. Cattle grazing in the distance, moving slow in the heat. The creek cutting through the property, life-giving and vital. All of it under threat from a man who'd never worked this land, never bled for it, never loved it the way you had to love hard country to make it work. He heard footsteps behind him. Tommy had walked out from the barn. Boss, the young man said. What do we do? Caleb turned to look at him. Tommy was 22, sunburned and nervous, still learning what it meant to stand for something. We fight, Caleb said. At the hearing, we present everything we've got. Show them this ranch is well managed, environmentally sound, vital to the local economy. We make them justify why they'd want to shut it down. You think that'll work? I think it's what we've got. That night, Caleb called Sarah and told her about the zoning review. She listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. This is bad, she finally said. If they change the zoning, your water rights case becomes moot. You can't use water for agriculture if agriculture isn't allowed. I know. We need to fight this on multiple fronts. The hearing, yes, but also public pressure. Get people to show up, speak in your favor. Ranchers, neighbors, anyone who'll stand up and say this is wrong. People are scared of Hale. Then we find the ones who aren't, or the ones who are angry enough not to care. Over the next 2 weeks, Caleb and Sarah worked to build support. They called other ranchers in the valley, explained what was happening, asked them to attend the hearing. Some said yes immediately. Others hemmed and hawed, made excuses, politely declined. Fear was a powerful motivator, and Hale had spent years teaching people to be afraid of crossing him. But not everyone was afraid. A rancher named Bill Kowalski agreed to testify. He was old, 76, with hands twisted by arthritis, but his memory was sharp, and he'd been running cattle in the valley since before Hale arrived. Used to be we helped each other out here, Kowalski said when Caleb visited him. Neighbor's barn burned. We'd all show up to rebuild it. Someone got hurt, we'd cover their work. That was the code. But Hale changed it. Made everything competitive, everyone watching their back. I'm tired of it. I'll speak. A woman named Maria Sanchez, who ran a small dairy operation, also agreed. He tried this with my cousin 5 years ago, she said. Drove him out of business. Someone needs to stand up. By the time the hearing date arrived, Caleb had 6 people willing to testify. It wasn't many, but it was something. The hearing was held in the county courthouse, in a meeting room that smelled like old carpet and municipal neglect. The planning commission sat at a long table at the front, 5 people, 3 of whom Caleb knew received campaign contributions from Hale's businesses. The room was maybe half full. Ranchers and townspeople, some curious, some supportive, some just there to watch the show. Caleb spotted Hale in the back row, sitting relaxed and confident, like he was attending a performance he'd already seen the ending to. The commission chairman, a man named Douglas Wade, called the meeting to order. We're here to review agricultural zoning in sections 4 through 9 of the county land use plan, Wade said. This review was initiated based on environmental concerns and changing land use patterns. We'll hear testimony from the county's environmental consultant, then from affected property owners and community members. The environmental consultant went first. He was smooth and professional, presenting data about groundwater stress, soil erosion, and what he called cumulative impact of agricultural operations. His presentation made ranching sound like an ecological disaster. When he finished, Wade called for testimony from property owners. Caleb went first. He stood at the microphone they'd set up, acutely aware of everyone watching. Hale in the back. The commissioners at their table. Sarah sitting in the front row, ready to object if things went off the rails. My name is Caleb Rourke, he said. My family's been ranching in this valley for 3 generations. We've managed our land responsibly, following every regulation, working with county extension services to implement best practices. What you're proposing, changing zoning to restrict agriculture, would destroy not just my ranch, but the entire economic base of this community. He spoke for 5 minutes, laying out the facts. Water testing results that showed no contamination, soil conservation measures, economic impact data. When he finished, Wade nodded politely and called the next speaker. Bill Kowalski shuffled to the microphone, gripping it with his twisted hands. I've been here 60 years, he said, voice rough but carrying. Seen boom times and bust, seen droughts that lasted years, seen families come and go. But I've never seen the county try to zone ranchers out of existence. You do this. You're not protecting the environment. You're clearing land for someone else to buy cheap. One of the commissioners, a woman named Teresa Bright, who wasn't on Hale's payroll, leaned forward. Mr. Kowalski, are you suggesting this zoning review has ulterior motives? I'm saying I've lived long enough to know when something smells wrong, and this smells rotten. Maria Sanchez testified next, then three other ranchers, each one speaking to the importance of agriculture in the valley, the care they took with their land, the injustice of being targeted. When the public testimony ended, Wade called for a 15-minute recess. Caleb stepped outside into the courthouse hallway. He was sweating despite the air conditioning, adrenaline making his hands shake slightly. Sarah joined him. "You did good," she said. "Think it'll matter?" With Wade and his cronies, probably not. But Bright seemed sympathetic, and you got it on record. That matters. They were about to go back in when Victor Hale appeared at the end of the hallway. He walked toward them with that same unhurried confidence, and when he reached them, he smiled. "Impressive testimony, Rourke," he said. "Very passionate. Wasn't trying to be impressive. Was trying to be truthful. Truth is such a slippery thing, isn't it? One man's truth is another man's opinion." Hale's smile didn't waver. "That reporter you talked to, Ortiz. She called me yesterday, wanted a comment for some story she's writing." Caleb's stomach tightened, but he kept his face neutral. "I told her I don't comment on ongoing business matters," Hale continued, "but I wanted you to know I'm aware of what you're trying to do. The publicity campaign, the testimonials, all of it. Very creative, but ultimately pointless." "We'll see." "No, we really won't." Hale's voice hardened slightly. "Because here's what you don't understand, Rourke. I've been playing this game for 20 years. I know every move, every countermove. You're predictable. This hearing, that reporter, your little coalition of ranchers, I planned for all of it. You're not surprising me. You're not scaring me. You're just delaying the inevitable." "Maybe the inevitable's not what you think it is." Hale studied him for a moment. Then he shook his head, almost sadly. "You could have walked away with money in your pocket and your dignity intact. Instead, you're going to lose everything. And when you do, I want you to remember you chose this." He walked away, leaving Caleb and Sarah standing in the hallway. "He's bluffing," Sarah said quietly. "He has to be." "Maybe," Caleb said. "Or maybe he's right, and we're just delaying the inevitable." "You don't believe that." "I don't know what I believe anymore." They went back into the hearing room. The commissioners filed back in, took their seats. Wade cleared his throat. "After reviewing the testimony and the environmental data, the commission will take this matter under advisement. We'll issue our decision within 30 days. Just like that, it was over. Caleb walked out of the courthouse into the late afternoon sun, feeling hollowed out. Marcus was waiting by the truck. "How'd it go?" he asked. 30 days to find out if we're allowed to keep ranching on our own land." Marcus swore quietly. "We gonna make it 30 days? Caleb looked at him. "We're going to try." They drove back to the ranch in silence. The valley spread out around them, beautiful and indifferent. The same land that had tested every Rourke who'd tried to claim it. Caleb wondered if he'd be the first one to fail. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He lay in bed listening to the house settle around him, every creak and groan familiar as his own breathing. The ceiling fan turned lazy circles overhead, moving air that was already hot and would stay hot until sometime around dawn. He got up at 3 in the morning and went to the kitchen, made coffee he didn't want, and sat at the table with the books spread out in front of him. Numbers that didn't add up no matter how many times he ran them. 3 weeks of operating cash left, maybe 4 if he stretched it. The zoning decision hanging over everything like a storm that wouldn't break. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the waiting. The feeling of being trapped in someone else's game, playing by rules he hadn't agreed to, toward an outcome that seemed predetermined. He was still sitting there when Marcus came in just after 5, earlier than usual. "Couldn't sleep either?" Marcus asked. "Seems like a waste of time lately." Marcus poured himself coffee and sat down across from Caleb. For a while, neither of them spoke. Just 2 tired men drinking bad coffee in a kitchen that had seen better days. "I did something," Marcus said finally. "Might have been stupid, but I did it anyway." Caleb looked up. "You remember Dale mentioning he used to work for a county official before he drifted this way?" "Vaguely." "Well, I got to asking him about it last night. Turns out he worked for Douglas Wade, the planning commission chairman, did maintenance on Wade's properties for about 2 years." Caleb set down his coffee. "And Dale says Wade's got a real estate holding company, separate from his county work, supposedly. But Dale remembers Hale coming around a few times, business meetings at Wade's office. This was 3-4 years ago. That's not proof of anything illegal." "No. but it's proof they've been in business together, which makes Wade deciding on a zoning change that benefits Hale look a lot less impartial. Caleb thought about that. Dale willing to say this on record? That's the thing, he's nervous. Says going public could blow back on him, especially if Wade gets vindictive. But I think with the right pressure, the right reason, he might. What kind of reason? Marcus leaned back. The kind where he sees it's not just about you anymore. It's about whether people like Wade get to keep rigging the system for people like Hale. Before Caleb could respond, his phone rang. Sarah's name on the screen. At 5 a.m, that couldn't be good. Tell me, he said when he answered. The bar complaint got dismissed. Examiner said it was frivolous and borderline harassment. I'm clear. Caleb felt some of the tension ease out of his shoulders. That's good news. It is. But there's something else. After the examiner issued his ruling, I got a call. Anonymous, blocked number. Man's voice. He said if I keep representing you, the next complaint won't be frivolous. A threat. A very clear one. And Caleb, I've been doing this long enough to know when someone's serious. Whoever called, they meant it. You want to step back from this case. Sarah was quiet for a moment. I want to be realistic about what we're facing. Hale's not just fighting in court anymore. He's fighting dirty. Threats, intimidation, God knows what else. And I have to ask myself if I'm prepared for that. Are you? Another pause, longer this time. I don't know. I want to say yes. I want to be brave and principled and all the things I went to law school believing I'd be. But I'm also scared. And I hate that I'm scared. Being scared isn't the same as quitting. No, but it makes quitting tempting. She exhaled. I'm not backing out, not yet, but I needed you to know where my head's at. After they hung up, Caleb sat with the phone in his hand, staring at nothing. Everyone in his corner was either threatened, intimidated, or exhausted. And Hale was just getting started. The sun was coming up when Tommy burst into the kitchen, moving fast and breathing hard. We got a problem, he said. Big one. They followed him out to the north pasture, where the cattle should have been grazing. Should have been, but weren't. The pasture was empty except for trampled grass and fence posts that had been knocked down. Someone ran them off, Tommy said. Happened sometime in the night. I found truck tracks by the gate, fresh ones. They opened it, spooked the herd, and scattered them. Marcus was already moving, checking the tracks, reading the story in the dirt. 2 vehicles, maybe 3. Coordinated. They knew what they were doing. How many head? Caleb asked. 40, maybe 50. They went in every direction. Could take days to round them all up. Days we don't have, Marcus said, and some of them probably made it to the highway by now. As if on cue, Caleb's phone rang, the county sheriff's office. Mr. Rourke, this is Deputy Wilson. We've got reports of cattle on Route 47, near mile marker 12. They yours? They are now. Someone cut my fence and ran them off. You'll need to get them off the highway before someone hits one. State Patrol's already on scene and they're not happy. I'm on my way. It took 6 hours to round up the cattle. 6 hours of riding and roping and hazing animals that were spooked and scattered across 5 miles of countryside. They found 38 head. The rest were either still running or had found places to hide that would take more time to search. By the time they got the recovered cattle back to the ranch, Caleb was sunburned and sore and so angry he could barely see straight. But anger didn't fix fences or find missing cattle or undo what had been done. Marcus rode up beside him as they penned the last of the recovered animals. This was professional, Marcus said, not vandals, not amateurs, someone who knows cattle and knows how to move them fast. Hale's people. That'd be my guess. Question is, what do we do about it? Caleb looked at the empty pasture, at the broken fence, at everything that kept breaking, no matter how many times they fixed it. We file a police report, he said. We document everything, and we keep going. That's it? What else is there? We can't prove it was Hale. Even if we could, proving it wouldn't get our cattle back or pay for the time we just lost. Marcus swore, low and bitter. So he just keeps coming, and we just keep taking it. For now. For how long? Caleb didn't have an answer to that. The police report went nowhere, just like he knew it would. Deputy Wilson came out, took notes, photographed the fence, and filed paperwork that would sit in a drawer until everyone involved had forgotten about it. No witnesses. No evidence beyond tire tracks that could have been anyone. 2 days later, Jennifer Ortiz called. I'm ready to run the story, she said. I've got testimonials from 8 of the 17 properties Hale acquired. I've got documentation of the county official connections. I've got the pattern laid out clear enough that even his lawyers won't be able to muddy it. When? Sunday edition, front page of the state section. It's going to make noise. Good. Caleb, I need to prepare you. Once this runs, Hale's going to know it came from you. Patterson too, but you especially. He's going to retaliate. He's already retaliating. This will be different. This is public humiliation. Men like Hale don't forget that, and they don't forgive it. Let him remember. Maybe it'll keep him from doing this to someone else. Ortiz was quiet for his moment. You know, I've covered a lot of stories like this. Powerful people abusing their positions, hurting regular folks who can't fight back. And most of the time, the regular folks lose. But every once in a while, someone stands up and doesn't back down, and things actually change. I hope you're one of those times. Me too. The story ran that Sunday, exactly as Ortiz had promised. Front page of the state section with a headline that read, Land Baron's Legacy, a Pattern of Pressure and Acquisition in Rural Counties. The article was thorough and damning. It laid out Hale's 17 acquisitions, the county official connections, the testimonials from people who'd lost everything. Patterson was quoted extensively. So was Caleb, though reading his own words in print felt strange, like seeing himself from outside. The story included Hale's response. These allegations are completely unfounded and appear to be coordinated by individuals with personal grievances. But it was buried in the 13th paragraph long after most readers would have made up their minds. By Monday morning, the Valley was talking about nothing else. Caleb's phone rang constantly, reporters wanting follow-up comments, ranchers who'd been too scared to speak up before now offering support. Even a few people he barely knew calling to say they'd always suspected Hale was dirty and were glad someone finally exposed him. But not everyone was supportive. He got calls from people telling him he'd made a mistake, that going after someone like Hale would only end badly, that he should have kept his head down and his mouth shut. One call came from a rancher named Pete Morrison, no relation to the Morrison who'd lost his property to Hale years before. You just painted a target on every independent rancher in this valley, Morrison said. Hale's not going to forget this, and when he comes for the rest of us, it'll be your fault. He was already coming for you, Caleb said. This just makes it harder for him to hide. You better hope you're right, because if you're wrong, a lot of people are going to suffer. The call that mattered most came Tuesday afternoon. Douglas Wade, the Planning Commission chairman. Mr. Rourke, Wade said, his voice tight with controlled anger. I read the article. So did I. The insinuations about my professional conduct are completely inappropriate. I've served this county with integrity for 15 years. Then the zoning review should be decided on its merits, not on who has business relationships with who. The review will be decided fairly, I assure you, but I wanted you to know accusations like the ones in that article have consequences. Legal consequences if they cross the line into defamation. I didn't accuse you of anything, Mr. Wade. I just stated facts about property transactions and county decisions. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe you should think about why. Wade hung up without responding. Sarah called an hour later. I heard Wade reached out to you. Threatened me, more like. He threatened me too. And the Tribune's legal department. He's rattled, which means the story hit home. Good. Maybe. But Caleb, rattled people make mistakes. And when powerful people make mistakes, they tend to take others down with them. Watch your back. The Planning Commission's decision came down on Wednesday, 2 weeks earlier than the promised 30-day timeline. Caleb got the official notice by certified mail, but he already knew what it would say from the way the delivery driver looked at him. Agricultural zoning in sections 4 through 9 is hereby changed to conservation residential, the notice read. Existing agricultural operations have 6 months to cease activity or face penalties for zoning violations. 6 months to shut down a ranch that had been operating for over a century. Marcus read the notice and threw it across the kitchen. They didn't even pretend to be fair about it, just rammed it through. They're scared, Caleb said. The article put them on the defensive, so they're rushing the decision before more scrutiny comes. Doesn't change the outcome. No, but it gives us grounds to appeal. Decisions made this fast, without proper review period, can be challenged. Oh, can we afford to challenge it? That was the question, wasn't it? Every legal move costs money. Every delay costs money. And Caleb was running out of both. Sarah came out to the ranch that evening. She looked tired, worn down in a way that went deeper than just lack of sleep. "I've been going through options," she said. "We can appeal the zoning decision to district court, argue procedural violations, inadequate review period, conflict of interest by the commissioners. But Caleb, it's going to take time. And money." "How much money?" "To do it right? 10,000, minimum, maybe 15. Caleb laughed, a short, bitter sound. "I don't have $10,000. I barely have 1,000. "Then we need to get creative. File pro se, represent yourself with me advising. It's risky. You make a mistake in the paperwork and the whole thing gets thrown out. But it's cheaper." "And if we lose?" Sarah met his eyes. "Then the zoning stands, and in 6 months you're ranching illegally on your own land." That night, Caleb sat on the porch with a bottle of his father's whiskey. The good stuff, saved for special occasions. This didn't feel special, but it felt like the kind of night that required good whiskey anyway. He thought about his great-grandfather, walking 300 miles to claim this land. About his grandfather, fighting off Matthias Hale's land grab. About his father, holding things together through drought and depression. 3 generations of Rourkes, all fighting the same fight. And now it was his turn, and he was losing. The sound of a vehicle coming up the drive pulled him from his thoughts. Headlights cut through the darkness, and for a moment Caleb tensed, wondering if this was another problem arriving unannounced. But the truck that parked near the house was one he recognized. Bill Kowalski's old Ford, running rough but still running. The old rancher climbed out slowly, joints protesting, and walked up to the porch. "Saw your light on," Kowalski said. "Figured you might be up." "Can't seem to sleep much lately." "I know the feeling." Kowalski eased himself into the other porch chair with a grunt. "Read about the zoning decision. Figured you could use some company." They sat in silence for a while. Caleb passed the bottle, and Kowalski took a drink without comment. "You know what the difference is between your generation and mine?" Kowalski said eventually. "We had the illusion that hard work mattered. That if you did things right, followed the rules, took care of your land, that counted for something. You grew up knowing it was a lie. That the game's rigged for people like Hale. So why keep playing? Because quitting means they win, and I'm too stubborn to let that happen." Kowalski took another drink. "That article you helped with, that took guts, real guts. Most folks would have kept their heads down." "A lot of good it did." "Did more than you think. People are talking, really talking, not just gossiping, about Hale, about the county, about how things work around here. You cracked something open. What happens next? That's up to all of us." The commission still changed the zoning. They did, but now everyone knows why, and that matters. Kowalski stood, bones creaking. "I got $8,000 in savings. Been putting it aside for emergencies. This feels like an emergency. It's yours if you need it." Caleb looked up at him. "Bill, I can't take your savings." "You're not taking it. I'm investing it. In the idea that someone in this valley can still fight back and win." The old man's face was hard in the porch light. "I'm too old to fight this fight myself, but I can help someone who isn't. So take the damn money and use it to appeal that zoning decision." "What if we lose?" "Then we lose. But at least we'll lose swinging." Kowalski headed for his truck. "I'll bring the check by tomorrow. You just make sure you use it right." He drove away, leaving Caleb alone on the porch with the whiskey and a strange feeling in his chest that might have been hope. The next morning, Maria Sanchez showed up with $3,000. "From the dairy cooperative," she explained. "We took a vote, passed unanimously. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about whether people like Hale get to own everything." By the end of the week, Caleb had received donations from 11 different sources. Not all of them were ranchers. The owner of the feed store in town sent $500 with a note. Tired of watching good people get run out. A retired teacher sent $200. A mechanic sent $150. None of them could really afford it. But they sent it anyway. The total came to just over $13,000. Sarah filed the appeal on Monday morning. She'd worked through the weekend to get the paperwork right, checking every citation, every procedural requirement. When she submitted it to the court clerk, she looked like she hadn't slept in days. "It's done," she said when she called Caleb. "We're officially challenging the zoning decision. Hearing scheduled in 6 weeks." 6 weeks. I know it's a long time, but it's faster than usual. The judge must have seen something in our filing that made him want to move quickly. Or Hale's lawyers are pushing to get it resolved before the story creates more problems for them. Either way, we've got our day in court. Now we just have to make it count. That afternoon, Caleb was in the barn when Dale found him. The ranch hand looked nervous, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Need to talk to you about something," Dale said. "All right. That stuff I told Marcus about Wade and Hale doing business together, I've been thinking about it. And I'm willing to testify. If it helps. If it matters." Caleb set down the bridle he'd been mending. "It could matter a lot. But Dale, you need to understand what you're signing up for. Wade's not going to like it. Hale's not going to like it. They might come after you. Let them come. I'm tired of being scared of people like that." Dale's jaw was set. "I worked for Wade for 2 years. I know things. About his business dealings, about who he meets with, about papers I saw on his desk. Maybe none of it's illegal, but it's sure as hell unethical. And if someone's finally standing up to these people, I want to help." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." Caleb called Sarah immediately. She arrived within the hour, and they spent the rest of the afternoon taking Dale's statement. Everything he remembered about his time working for Wade, the meetings with Hale, the real estate deals, the conversations he'd overheard about zoning and permits, and who needed to be convinced of what. None of it was smoking gun evidence, but it painted a picture. And pictures could be powerful in court. "This is good," Sarah said when they finished. "Really good. If we can establish that Wade had ongoing business relationships with Hale while making county decisions that benefited him, we can argue the entire zoning process was compromised. Will the judge care? Depends on the judge, but it's our best shot." That night, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that things were building towards something. The appeal was filed. The story had run. People were talking, supporting, pushing back against the system that had crushed so many before. But Hale hadn't responded yet. Not really. The zoning decision had been his move, but it felt like a defensive one, a reaction to the article, not a calculated attack, which meant the real attack was still coming. It came 3 days later in the form of a lawsuit. Victor Hale, through his holding company, was suing Caleb Rourke for defamation, seeking $5 million in damages. The complaint alleged that Caleb had made false and malicious statements to the press designed to damage Hale's reputation and business interests. Sarah read the complaint with an expression that got darker with each page. "This is a slap suit," she said. "Strategic lawsuit against public participation. He's not trying to win. He's trying to bury you in legal fees and make you shut up." "Can he win?" "Probably not. You didn't defame him. You gave factual information to a reporter. But defending against this will cost money. A lot of money. And that's the point. He wants to drain your resources so you can't fight the zoning appeal. How much money are we talking about? To defend properly? 30,000 minimum? Maybe 50. Caleb sat down heavily. "I don't have $30,000. "I know. Which is why this is so effective. He's not trying to beat you in court. He's trying to make you give up before you get there." "So what do I do?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at the lawsuit like it was a puzzle she was trying to solve. "We could try to get it dismissed as a slap suit. Some states have anti-slap laws that allow for early dismissal of cases designed to silence critics. But this state's law is weak. It's a long shot. Everything's a long shot at this point. Then we take it. File a motion to dismiss. Argue that your statements were protected speech, made in good faith, about a matter of public concern. Maybe we get lucky. Maybe the judge sees through what Hale's doing. And if he doesn't, then you're facing a defamation trial you can't afford to defend." That evening, Caleb called a meeting at the ranch. Everyone who'd been fighting with him from the beginning: Marcus, Tommy, Dale, Sarah, Bill Kowalski, and Maria Sanchez. Even Robert Patterson drove down from Redemption Creek. They gathered in the barn, sitting on hay bales and upturned buckets, a small group of tired people who'd been fighting too long with too little. Caleb stood in front of them and told them about the lawsuit, about what it meant, what it would cost, what the options were. When he finished, the barn was quiet. Then Kowalski spoke up. "He's trying to break you. He's trying to break all of us," Maria said. "You're just the one standing in front." "Question is," Patterson said, "what do we do about it?" They talked for 2 hours, about strategy and money, and whether fighting was worth the cost. Some argued for settling, for finding a way to make peace before things got worse. Others argued for doubling down, for fighting harder. In the end, it was Marcus who cut through the debate. "We've been reacting this whole time," he said, responding to Hale's moves, defending against his attacks. "Maybe it's time we stopped defending and started attacking." "How?" Caleb asked. "You got that reporter interested. You got a story in the paper. But that's just the start. We need to make this bigger. Get more attention, more pressure. Make it so expensive for Hale to keep fighting that he has to back down." "You're talking about a media campaign." "I'm talking about a war, not with lawyers or county officials, with public opinion. We make Hale toxic. We make every move he makes against you a news story. We turn this from a private dispute into a public scandal." Sarah leaned forward. "That could work, if we're strategic about it. More interviews, more documentation. We document every harassment, every intimidation tactic. We make him the villain in a story that people can't stop reading." "It could also backfire," Patterson said. "Make him more determined, more vicious." "He's already vicious," Tommy said quietly. "At least this way people would know about it." They talked until late, refining the strategy, identifying targets and tactics. By the time everyone left, Caleb had a plan. Risky, aggressive, and probably desperate. But it was something. He stood on the porch after everyone had gone, looking out at his land in the moonlight. Somewhere out there, cattle were sleeping, the creek was flowing, the land was doing what land did, enduring, surviving, waiting. And Caleb Rourke, for the first time in weeks, felt like maybe he could endure too. The media campaign started small. Sarah called Jennifer Ortiz and pitched a follow-up story about Hale's defamation lawsuit. Ortiz ran it 3 days later with a headline that made Caleb wince. "After expose, land baron sues, struggling rancher for millions." The article was shorter than the first one, but more pointed. It framed the lawsuit exactly as Sarah had described it, a weapon designed to silence criticism through financial pressure. It quoted legal experts who called it a textbook slap suit. And it ended with a question that hung in the air like smoke. When does aggressive business practice become abuse of the legal system? The response was immediate and loud. Local news stations picked up the story, then regional ones. By the end of the week, a reporter from a national agricultural news network called, asking for an interview. Caleb did it from the porch of his ranch house, cattle visible in the background, looking every inch the embattled small rancher facing down corporate power. The interview aired on a Thursday evening. By Friday morning, Caleb's phone was ringing constantly. More reporters, more offers of support, and a few threats from people who thought he was making trouble where none was needed. But the momentum was building, and Hale had to feel it. The first sign that the pressure was working came from an unexpected source. Teresa Bright, the planning commissioner who'd seemed sympathetic during the zoning hearing, called Caleb directly. "Mr. Rourke," she said, her voice careful and measured. "I wanted you to know that I'm requesting the commission reconsider the zoning decision. I filed a formal motion for review." "Why?" "Because after reading the Tribune article and looking more carefully at the timeline, I have concerns about the process, about whether we gave adequate consideration to public testimony, about whether certain commissioners might have conflicts of interest." "You're talking about Wade. I'm talking about following proper procedure. The motion's been filed. We'll see if there's support for a review." It wasn't much. But it was something, a crack in what had seemed like a solid wall. Sarah filed the anti-SLAPP motion 2 days later. It was a long shot, but the media attention had changed the calculus. Now there was public scrutiny on Hale's lawsuit. Now there were people watching to see whether the court would let a powerful man use litigation to silence criticism. The hearing on the motion was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, the ranch work continued. Cattle still needed feeding, fences still needed mending. The land didn't care about lawsuits or media campaigns. It just demanded the same labor it always had. Marcus and Caleb were fixing a water trough one afternoon when a black SUV pulled up the drive. Expensive, familiar. Caleb recognized it before the door opened. Victor Hale stepped out, alone this time. No lawyers, no county officials. Just him, in jeans and a work shirt that probably cost more than Caleb's entire wardrobe. "Rourke," he called. "Got a minute?" Marcus tensed, but Caleb put a hand on his arm. "It's fine." He walked over to where Hale stood, staying on his side of the fence line. A small thing, but it mattered. This was still his land. Hell of a media circus you've created, Hale said.
Wasn't trying to create anything, just trying to keep what's mine. By dragging my name through the mud. By painting me as some kind of villain in a story that's a lot more complicated than you make it sound. Is it? Because from where I stand, it looks pretty simple. You want my land, I won't sell, so you're using every lever of power you've got to take it anyway.
Hale smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You know what your problem is, Rourke? You think this is personal. You think I'm targeting you specifically, that this is some kind of vendetta. But it's just business. This land, your ranch, it's part of a larger development plan. Water rights, mineral access, future commercial possibilities. You're standing in the way of progress. Progress for who? Or for the valley? For the region? For economic development that could bring jobs, investment, growth? But you can't see past your own fence line. I can see just fine. I see a man who spent 20 years buying up land by ruining the people who own it. I see county officials who do your bidding in exchange for campaign donations and business deals. I see a system rigged for people like you. And I see a failing rancher who's too stubborn to accept reality. Hale's voice hardened. You can't win this, Caleb. Even with your media campaign, even with your lawyer and your friends. I have more money, more patience, more resources. I can outlast you. I can outlast everyone helping you. And when this is over, when you've burned through every cent and every favor, you'll still lose. And you'll have nothing to show for it except the satisfaction of being stubborn. Maybe, but at least people will know what you are. Will they? Because here's what I think. I think people forget. The news cycle moves on, the reporters find new stories, and in 6 months, a year, this whole thing will be forgotten. But you'll still be broke, still be fighting legal battles you can't afford, still be losing, just slower. Caleb held his gaze. Why are you here, Hale? You didn't drive out here just to tell me I can't win. For a long moment, Hale said nothing. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I'm here to make you one final offer. Double what I offered before. Enough to clear your debts, start over somewhere else, and have money left to live on. You sign over the property, drop the appeals and the lawsuits, and walk away. Today. No. You didn't even look at the number. Don't need to. Hale's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. Probably. But it's my mistake to make. You know what happens now, don't you? Now the gloves really come off. Now I stop trying to be reasonable. Now I use every weapon I've got to bury you so deep you'll never see daylight again. Do what you have to do, Caleb said. I'm not going anywhere. Hale stared at him for a long moment. Then he folded the paper and put it back in his pocket. When he spoke again, his voice was cold as January wind. You're going to regret this. Not today, maybe not tomorrow. But eventually, when you're sitting in a courtroom watching them auction off your land to pay legal judgments, you're going to remember this conversation, and you're going to wish you'd been smarter. He got back in his SUV and drove away. Marcus walked over. What do you want? To buy me out, one last time. You tell him to go to hell? More or less? Good. Marcus spat in the dirt. Man like that, you give him an inch, he takes everything. That night, Caleb sat at the kitchen table going through the books for what felt like the 100th time. The donations had helped, but they were earmarked for the legal fights. Operating expenses still came out of his nearly empty accounts. He had 3 weeks until the anti-SLAPP hearing, 5 weeks until the zoning appeal, and maybe 2 weeks of cash left. The math didn't work. It hadn't worked in months, but now the gap between what he needed and what he had was too wide to ignore. His phone rang. Sarah. I've got news, she said. Teresa Bright's motion got support. 2 other commissioners signed on. They're calling for a full review of the zoning decision, including an investigation into potential conflicts of interest. That's good. It's better than good. It means Wade's losing control of the commission. And if the investigation finds what we think it'll find, the zoning change could be reversed. How long does that take? Weeks, maybe months, but Caleb, this is momentum. Real momentum. After they hung up, Caleb allowed himself a moment of something that might have been hope. Then he went back to the books, because hope didn't pay bills. The anti-SLAPP hearing was held in district court on a Tuesday morning. The courtroom was old but well-maintained, with wooden benches worn smooth by decades of use and windows that let in light but not much air. Hale's legal team took up an entire table. 3 lawyers in expensive suits, all of them looking like they'd been assembled from the same catalog. Sarah sat alone at the defense table, one woman with a briefcase and a legal pad, looking small but determined. The judge was a woman named Eleanor Vance, somewhere in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back and a reputation for not tolerating nonsense from either side. She listened to Hale's lawyers argue for 20 minutes about how Caleb's statements to the press were defamatory and malicious. Then she turned to Sarah. "Ms. Chen, your turn." Sarah stood. "Your Honor, this lawsuit is a textbook example of a slap suit, an attempt to use litigation as a weapon to silence protected speech. Mr. Rourke provided factual information to a reporter about a matter of significant public concern. He has a First Amendment right to do so. Mr. Hale is using this lawsuit not to seek legitimate redress for actual harm, but to punish Mr. Rourke for speaking out and to deter others from doing the same." She argued for 15 minutes, citing case law and precedent, building her argument brick by brick. When she finished, Judge Vance leaned back in her chair. "I've read the complaint and the motion to dismiss," the judge said. "And I've read the Tribune article that prompted this lawsuit. Mr. Hale's attorneys, can you point to a single statement in that article that was factually false?" The lead attorney, a man named Cortland, stood. "Your Honor, the article's overall characterization of Mr. Hale's business practices. I didn't ask about characterization. I asked about facts. Was anything Mr. Rourke told the reporter factually incorrect?" Cortland hesitated. "The context in which those facts were presented was misleading, and context is editorial judgment, Mr. Cortland. It's protected. I'll ask again. Was anything factually false?" The implication that Mr. Hale engaged in coordinated efforts with county officials, implications aren't statements of fact. They're inferences readers can draw. Again, false statements. Do you have any? Cortland looked at his notes, then at his colleagues. "We believe the overall narrative—" "I'm going to stop you there," Judge Vance said. "This court is not in the business of policing narratives. We're in the business of adjudicating legal claims, and a defamation claim requires false statements of fact. You haven't identified any. Ms. Chen's motion to dismiss is granted." The courtroom was quiet for a moment. Then Sarah's voice, steady and professional. "Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Cortland, I'm also awarding attorney's fees to the defendant under the anti-SLAPP statute. You filed a frivolous lawsuit designed to intimidate rather than seek legitimate remedy. That has consequences." Judge Vance banged her gavel. "We're adjourned." Outside the courthouse, Sarah looked like she might actually smile. "We won," she said. "Did we?" "The lawsuit's dismissed. Hale has to pay your legal fees, and it's on the record that a judge called his lawsuit frivolous. That's a win." "How much in attorney's fees?" "Probably $15,000, maybe more." It was money Caleb desperately needed, but it was also a signal. The system for once had worked the way it was supposed to. The news spread fast. Jennifer Ortiz ran another story. The local television stations picked it up. Suddenly, Caleb Rourke wasn't just a struggling rancher. He was a symbol. David versus Goliath. The little guy who stood up and didn't back down. It felt strange being symbolic. He was just trying to keep his land, but the attention had effects. 3 days after the court ruling, Douglas Wade announced he was recusing himself from the zoning appeal and the conflict of interest investigation. He cited perceived conflicts and said he wanted to ensure the integrity of the process. It was as close to an admission of guilt as anyone was going to get. Teresa Bright became the interim commission chair, and the following week she announced that the commission was suspending the zoning change pending the results of the investigation. Suspended. Not reversed, but not enforced either. Caleb could keep ranching, at least for now. The final hearing came 6 weeks later. The commission had completed its investigation and was ready to rule on whether the zoning change should stand. The courthouse meeting room was packed. More people than Caleb had ever seen at a county hearing. Ranchers, townspeople, reporters, even some faces he didn't recognize. People from other counties who'd heard about the fight and wanted to see how it ended. Teresa Bright called the meeting to order. "The commission has completed its review of the zoning decision for sections 4 through 9, she said. "We've examined the process, the evidence presented, and the concerns raised about potential conflicts of interest. We've also retained an independent environmental consultant to verify the claims made in the original report." She paused, looking at her notes. The independent review found that the environmental concerns cited in the original zoning change were overstated and, in some cases, not supported by scientific evidence. Furthermore, the Commission has determined that the expedited timeline for the decision violated our own procedural requirements for public comment and review. Caleb felt Marcus tense beside him. Therefore, Bright continued, the Commission votes to reverse the zoning change. Agricultural zoning in sections 4 through 9 is restored, effective immediately. The room erupted. Not in celebration exactly, this was a county meeting after all, but in a low murmur of conversation and relief that sounded like wind through trees. Caleb sat very still, not quite believing it. Beside him, Sarah squeezed his arm. "We won," she whispered. This time it felt real. After the hearing, people came up to shake Caleb's hand. Bill Kowalski, moving slow but grinning wide. Maria Sanchez, with tears in her eyes. Patterson, who'd driven down from Redemption Creek just to be there. "You did it," the old man said. "You actually did it." "We did it," Caleb corrected. "Wouldn't have been possible without everyone who helped." "Maybe. But you're the one who stood when it mattered." The celebration, such as it was, happened at a bar in town. Nothing fancy, just a place with cheap beer and peanuts on the tables. Marcus bought the first round. Sarah bought the second. By the third, Caleb lost track of who was buying. Tommy raised a glass. To not getting zoned out of existence. "I'll drink to that," Dale said. They drank, they talked, they relived the fight like soldiers after a battle, each story getting slightly bigger in the telling. Around midnight, Caleb stepped outside for air. The street was quiet, most of the town already asleep. He stood there breathing in the cool night air, thinking about everything that had happened. The door opened behind him. Sarah came out, steadier on her feet than she had any right to be. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah, just needed a minute." "You know this isn't over, right? The zoning's restored, but Hale's still out there. He could try something else." "I know. But maybe he won't. Maybe the publicity, the court losses, the investigation, maybe it's enough to make him back off, find easier targets. Maybe." They stood in silence for a while. "You did good work," Caleb said finally. "I couldn't have done this without you." "You could have, but it would have taken longer and cost more." Sarah smiled. "Besides, I needed this. Needed to remember why I became a lawyer in the first place. Not to push paper, but to fight for people who need fighting for." "Well, thanks for fighting. Thanks for being worth it." She went back inside. Caleb stayed out a while longer looking at the stars over the valley, thinking about his great-grandfather who'd walked 300 miles for this land. His grandfather who'd defended it. His father who'd kept it alive. And now him. The Rourke who almost lost it all, but didn't. The ranch work resumed its normal rhythm. Cattle to feed, fences to mend, water to manage. The same labor that had filled Caleb's days before the fight started. But something was different now. The valley felt different. People looked at him different. Not with pity or sympathy, but with something like respect. He'd stood up to power and survived. That meant something in a place like this. The attorney's fees from Hale's dismissed lawsuit came through, $18,000 after Sarah's expenses. Combined with what was left from the donations and a decent cattle sale that fall, Caleb was actually solvent for the first time in years. Not comfortable, not secure, but not drowning either. He used some of the money to make real repairs, not just patch jobs, but proper fixes that would last. New fence posts, a rebuilt water system, repairs to the barn that had been neglected too long. Marcus oversaw most of it, grumbling about waste when Caleb insisted on doing things right. "We survived this long on patch jobs," Marcus said, "and I'm tired of surviving. Want to see what living looks like for a change." In December, Jennifer Ortiz called. "Thought you'd want to know," she said. "The Tribune's doing a year-end feature on significant stories. The Hale investigation made the list. They're calling it How One Rancher Took on Rural Power Structures and Won." "I didn't win. I just didn't lose." "Same thing, sometimes." She paused. "How are things out there?" "Quiet, which feels strange after everything." "Quiet's good. Means you can focus on ranching instead of fighting." "Yeah, though I've gotten used to the fighting. Almost miss it." "Don't. Trust me, you're better off boring." After they hung up, Caleb thought about that. About being boring.
about normal days filled with normal work, about not waiting for the next crisis. It sounded pretty good, actually.
Victor Hale's name came up one more time, in January. Sarah called with news that Hale was selling off several of his valley properties. Not the big ones, those he kept, but some of the acquisitions from recent years. Word is he's consolidating, Sarah said, focusing on different regions. Less scrutiny here after everything that happened. So he's leaving? Not entirely, but backing off, which, given the alternative, I'll take. Caleb would take it too. On a cold February morning, Caleb rode out to the north pasture where this whole thing had started, where the surveyors had shown up in the night, where the first fence had been cut, where the fight had really begun. The fence was solid now. The cattle were healthy. The land looked the same as it always had, hard and beautiful and indifferent to human struggle. He sat his horse there for a long time, looking out over his 1,500 acres. This wasn't the end of anything, he knew. There would be other droughts, other debts, other fights. The land would keep demanding labor and sacrifice, and more than most people were willing to give. But it was his land, earned and defended and kept, and maybe that was enough. Marcus rode up beside him, quiet in the way he had of appearing without announcement.
"Thinking deep thoughts?" Marcus asked. "Thinking about how close we came to losing all this. But didn't. You know what your grandfather told me once?" Marcus said. "Said the land doesn't care who owns it. Doesn't care about deeds or courts or fights. It just is. But the people who work it, who care for it, who refuse to walk away when things get hard, those people matter. Not to the land, maybe, but to what the land represents." "What's it represent?" "Depends who you ask. For your family, always seemed to represent the idea that a person could claim something and hold it through sheer stubbornness. That hard work and integrity count for something, even when the whole world's telling you they don't." Caleb thought about that, about his great-grandfather walking 300 miles, about his grandfather fighting Matthias Hale, about his father surviving droughts and depressions, about himself standing against Victor Hale when everyone said he couldn't win. "You think integrity counts?" Caleb asked. "I think it's the only thing that does," Marcus said. "Money comes and goes, power shifts, but a man who stands for something, who doesn't bend just because the wind's blowing hard, that's worth something, maybe not in dollars, but in ways that matter more." They rode back to the ranch house together as the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning cold. When they got close enough to see the buildings, Caleb noticed that Tommy had already started the morning feeding. Smoke was rising from the bunkhouse chimney. Dale was working on the tractor, visible through the open barn doors. Ordinary ranch work done by ordinary people, on an ordinary day. It was the most beautiful thing Caleb had seen in months. That evening he sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun set over the valley. The sky went through its nightly progression of colors, orange to red to purple to the deep blue that came before full dark. His phone rang. He almost didn't answer, tired of the constant calls that had defined the past few months. But the number was local. "Mr. Rourke?" A woman's voice, unfamiliar. "My name is Catherine Morrison. My family used to own a ranch about 30 miles north of you. We lost it about 8 years ago." Caleb's chest tightened. Morrison, one of the families in Patterson's files, one of the 17 that Hale had pushed out. "I remember," he said. "I'm sorry about what happened. I didn't call for sympathy. I called to say thank you for standing up, for fighting when we couldn't, for showing that it was possible to win against someone like Hale. I'm not sure I won, just survived. Same thing for people like us. And Mr. Rourke, you did more than survive. You showed other people it was possible. There's a rancher over in Cooper County having trouble with a development company trying to force him out. He called me yesterday, said he read about your fight, and it gave him ideas. He's organizing, getting legal help, planning to stand his ground." Caleb didn't know what to say to that. "You started something," Catherine Morrison continued. "Whether you meant to or not, you showed people they don't have to roll over. That's worth more than keeping your ranch, as important as that is. That's changing how people think about power and who gets to have it." After the call, Caleb sat for a long time thinking about that. About whether he'd really changed anything or just gotten lucky. About whether his fight mattered beyond his own fence lines. He didn't have answers, but he knew this. When the surveyors had shown up in the dark, he'd had a choice. Roll over or stand up. Accept the inevitable or fight it.
He'd chosen to fight, and whatever came next, whatever other battles waited, he could live with that choice. The stars were coming out now, same stars that had watched over this valley for millions of years. Same stars his great-grandfather had navigated by on that 300-mile walk. Same stars that would still be there long after Caleb Rourke was dust. But for now, on this particular piece of Earth, under these particular stars, he was still standing, still working, still holding the line. And in the end, maybe that was all anyone could ask for. Not to win every fight, but to stand for something worth fighting for. Not to be perfect, but to be present. Not to live without fear, but to act despite it. The land stretched out around him in the darkness, 1,500 acres of hard country that demanded everything and gave back just enough to keep you trying. Caleb Rourke drained his coffee and went inside. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, more of the endless labor that ranching demanded. But it would be his work, on his land, under his terms. And after everything, that was enough.